I walk right into those. So density and height. This is a diagram that my dear friend Esteban has created. This is actually more or less what's happening on the island and will continue to happen. This is the status quo, which doesn't work from a sustainability point of view whatsoever, and does not work from a community point of view whatsoever either. It does create some great houses and some great places, absolutely. But it is not the way to build a great community, and that's the opportunity before us right now. This is the way to do that. And that big green circle in particular is absolutely the way to do that. Building height. This diagram at the bottom I've shown before. This is a diagram from Andres Dewani, who is supposedly a famous planner. I don't actually have a lot of time for him, but he's said a lot of great things. This thing is very interesting. Basically, this diagram says it walks you from rural to very urban, and it says, if we're looking at this from an ecological point of view, how does that relate? How does man's footprint on the earth relate to that? And it basically says that when we're very urban and we protect green space, or when we're very, very green and don't build anything, those are the most ecological footprints that we can do. Bowen, unfortunately, is not in a very good spot because it's somewhere in here. So what we're proposing, and this line kind of represents where we're trying to hit, in the cove. We're not talking about doing this all over the place. We're also talking about walking ourselves from the single family height of the rest of the island upwards towards the four corners center of our universe at about 4 stories. And I can give you some strong arguments for that later. And then walking back down towards the cove and towards the water. And there's some very strong arguments for doing that, including some very good economic ones. 4 stories. No, I count a lot of floors on these buildings, and granted some of them are the back sides of buildings, but we have a lot of topography on Bowen Island, and in particular in Snug Cove. So this precedent, whether some people like it or not, or they think it's appropriate or not, is a Bowen form. It's already here. And we're proposing, Wolfgang, to be no higher than that. How do we do that? Well, one of the key ingredients from a planning point of view is keeping the streetscape of a pedestrian scale. We are human beings. That's how we experience space. We don't experience it up here or way out here, especially on Bowen. We have a reality of 12 to 20-story trees to set this into. It's a very unique landscape to build buildings into. That's an important context to remember. So stepping the buildings back to respect that pedestrian scale is very important. The other note out here is that from a development point of view, from an economic point of view, 4 stories represents the most you can build in wood frame. And that's a very important threshold for the development community. Beyond that, you get into concrete and steel. And below that, you don't hit the maximum economic threshold for building what you're doing. So what does that look like? Well, we can argue about the architecture. This is a 4-story building. In this case, you're seeing 2 upper floors and the main floor. This, I would argue, is a fantastic public realm sidewalk condition, a pedestrian scaled situation. The 4th floor, which actually peeks through over here, really doesn't enter into it, and that's what that section was trying to say. There's another street which some of you may be familiar with. I can't even tell if it's a 3-story building, but it's actually a 4-story building that steps back, and there are courtyards and public space engaging the street. There's another 4-story building. If I probably did this slide real quickly, you wouldn't know that, but it is. Enough of that. Ferry marshalling. Okay, this one we can debate. I'll try to go through this fairly quickly. I brought this up before, and I'll bring it up again. As a resident of the island, I still find it abhorrent, even though it's a great functional solution, a functional solution, that we have 5 lanes of asphalt as we enter our beautiful paradise. That's what we tell people we're first about, is 5 lanes of asphalt. That doesn't look like the island the way I think of Bowen, that slide doesn't represent it to me, but that's the first impression of many people. So there have been I've lost count. Somebody in the room, maybe Allison knows how many plans there's been for ferry marshalling. This one was the one that we were charged with engaging with, and I think it's probably the best one to date, and I'm hoping that the ones that we suggested improve upon it, and you can be the judge of that. For those of you that don't know, this plan basically says that the offloading and onloading ferry traffic is moved basically into the park, creating an island of buildings in the center of Government Road, and creating a much smaller, very calmed road, basically where the buildings are today in Snug Cove. It creates an intersection that's even wider than the one we have today, because it funnels more lanes into that intersection. It also wipes out a considerable part of large evergreen forest here. It also cuts off most of the front lawn of the library and gets very close to the buildings themselves. And as Sue Ellen will tell you, wipes out the heron nesting area as well. So we looked at this from a number of points of view. We had debates amongst our team. We certainly had a lot of debate with the community as well. The first scheme we looked at was what we called the remote marshalling plan, which said, okay, one of our key goals for this area from a planning point of view is to make a great street, is to make a pedestrian first environment. Well, then let's get the ferry cars out of here, essentially. I mean, it seems like an obvious first place to look. So what this scheme did is allowed one lane of offloading traffic, 2 lanes of marshalling, but way up the hill and around the corner to the entry to Artisan Square. So very remote ferry marshalling. I personally don't like this scheme. I think it solves some of our problems, but not all of them. And BC Ferries is not very supportive at all. It does, however, retain all of the green space on this side of the road and certainly creates a great street. Another scheme that was presented to us, and I don't see Alan's face in the audience tonight, was by one of the residents. And his suggestion was he took a quick sketch of the ferry itself and moved it around on his computer over the land and said, well, where could we put those 92 cars? And he came up with Rondi's Marina parking lot. Rondi's not here either. I'm not sure how to feel about that. But we've drawn that scheme and analyzed it because it was another valid alternative. Certainly that asphalt already exists. It's a logical place to put it. It does achieve the kind of more walkable, pedestrian-oriented street that you'd like. It has the option of encroaching with the odd building into the parkland or not. So it achieves a lot of things. What it doesn't achieve is it doesn't change the 5 lanes of asphalt. In fact, it creates 9 or 10 lanes of asphalt as you come into the park. And we have some other ideas for that piece of property as well. So this scheme has some validity, and keep that in mind as well. This is the scheme that we arrived at. And this will be debated long after this meeting is over, I'm sure. I'll walk you through it very quickly. It's a phased scheme based largely on that acoustics plan. The central concept is to, again, free up the government road to be a pedestrian first environment. But what this plan does is say, okay, let's allow that onloading marshalling to take place somewhat in the code. Could be 1 lane, could be 2. That's what we're saying here. And as of today, same thing, excess marshalling is up the hill. If we do 2 lanes down here, we can accommodate the entire loading of the Queen of Capilano from the Four Corners intersection down. By taking the offloading traffic behind that area, we can actually alleviate a lot of that rush hour, or it's literally a rush hour on Vaughan, and make sure that that street is calm.